I never set out to be a hero, and I certainly never wanted to be a politician. My name is Frank, and for the better part of 2 decades, my life in Maple Creek Estates was about as exciting as watching paint dry, which was exactly how I liked it. I run a local business, Frank's for Seasons, handling everything from lawn care in the summer to snow removal in the winter. It's hard work, but it's honest work, and it's allowed me to build a good life in the very neighborhood I helped create. Maple Creek wasn't some pre-planned corporate development. It started as a tract of land, a dozen families, and a shared dream. We pooled our resources, paved our own road, and dug our own community well. I was there from the beginning, swinging a hammer and writing checks. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, was our own invention, born out of necessity. It wasn't some tyrannical body designed to measure the height of your grass. Its sole purpose was to manage the essentials, the shared road, the well, and the little patch of green at the entrance with the wooden Maple Creek Estate sign that I myself had carved. For 19 years, the HOA was practically invisible. We paid our modest dues, a couple $100 a year, which went into a fund for road salt, well pump maintenance, and mowing the entrance. The annual meeting was a potluck barbecue where we'd vote on the budget in 5 minutes and spend the next 3 hours catching up. It was simple, effective, and it worked because we were neighbors, not subjects. That all changed the year Brenda moved in. She and her silent, perpetually bewildered-looking husband bought the old Miller place on the corner. From the moment her moving van pulled away, Brenda seemed to view our quiet community not as a home, but as a project. A fixer-upper. A kingdom in need of a firm ruler. She was a woman who radiated a kind of aggressive competence, the type who corrects your grammar in a casual conversation and organizes her spice rack alphabetically. She saw our relaxed, functional HOA as a disorderly mess, a power vacuum just begging to be filled. Within 6 months, she had attended every meeting, volunteered for every committee, which she usually created herself, and presented a compelling, if slightly terrifying, PowerPoint presentation on modernizing Maple Creek for the 21st century. The old guard, content with our potluck-style governance, were completely unprepared for her organized assault. She talked about property values, curb appeal, and standardized aesthetics. People were initially impressed by her energy. Before we knew what was happening, she had been elected HOA president. The vote was mostly a collection of abstentions from people who just wanted to get back to their burgers. We had no idea we had just handed the keys to a tyrant. The changes started small, like a slow-leaking faucet. First, it was a memo about trash cans. They had to be stored out of sight, not just on the side of the house, but completely invisible from the road. Then came the mailbox mandate. The charming collection of unique, homeowner-chosen mailboxes was to be replaced by a single, board-approved model, a hideous beige plastic box that cost $200. Then there were the rules about lawn ornaments. No more flamingos. No more garden gnomes. Holiday decorations could only be displayed for a period of 14 days, and not a moment longer. Each new rule was a minor annoyance, a small chip at the soul of our community, but it was easier to comply than to fight. We were busy people. We had jobs and families. We grumbled to each other over the fence but did nothing. We tolerated it, assuming her zealousness would eventually burn itself out. We were wrong. The first real snow of the season arrived not with a gentle dusting, but as a full-blown blizzard. It was an early December storm, a monster that barreled in from the north and dumped 2 feet of heavy, wet snow in less than 12 hours. The world went white. The wind howled, piling drifts up against our doors and burying cars where they Saturday. For most towns, this is a major event. For Maple Creek Estates, it was a particular kind of crisis. Our single road, Maple Creek Lane, is private. The town plows don't touch it. They stop at the main road, leaving us to fend for ourselves. This was a situation I was uniquely equipped to handle. My business had a fleet of 3 commercial-grade plow trucks. For 20 years, I'd made it my personal responsibility to clear our neighborhood. It was part of the unspoken agreement among the original families. I had the equipment, so I did the plowing. Some years, the HOA fund would cover my fuel costs. Most years, I just did it. I'd clear the main lane first, then do a pass on everyone's driveway. I'd always make sure to get to George, our oldest resident, and Mrs. Gable, a widow on a fixed income, before anyone else. It was just what you did. You took care of your neighbors. So, at 4 in the morning, with the snow still falling thick and fast, I fired up my biggest truck, a gleaming Ford F-350 with a 10-foot V-plow. The engine roared to life, a familiar and comforting sound in the muffled silence of the blizzard. I spent the next 4 hours working. I carved a wide, clean path down the entire length of Maple Creek Lane. I cleared the entrance, pushed back the banks, and dug out every single one of the 20 driveways in our community. By the time the sun tried to break through the grey clouds, our little neighborhood was an oasis of accessibility in a sea of white. People could get to work. Emergency vehicles could get in, if needed. I parked my truck, covered in snow and ice, and went inside, feeling the deep satisfaction of a hard job well done. I was drinking a hot cup of coffee, looking out my kitchen window at the clean pavement, when I saw her. Brenda was marching down my freshly plowed driveway like a drill sergeant. She was bundled in a ridiculously expensive-looking ski jacket, her face a mask of cold fury. I sighed, put down my mug, and went to the door. I didn't even have it fully open before she started in. "Franklin," she snapped, not even bothering with a hello. She was the only person who called me Franklin. "What do you think you are doing?" I blinked, confused. "Good morning, Brenda." I was just clearing the snow. I gestured vaguely at the road, the driveways, the general lack of an impassable blizzard. "You are in direct violation of the Maple Creek covenants, conditions, and restrictions," she said, her voice sharp and brittle. She held up her phone, displaying a PDF of a document. Article 7, Section 12, as ratified by the board last month. All contracted services performed within the community, including but not limited to landscaping, construction, and snow removal, must be conducted by pre-approved, licensed, and insured vendors selected from the official community vendor list. I stared at her. It took a moment for the sheer absurdity of her statement to sink in. "Brenda, I've been plowing this road for 20 years. I own the business. I am licensed and insured." "But are you on the list?" she shot back, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "No, you are not. The board has contracted with Blizzard Busters Incorporated for all our snow removal needs this season. They are the sole, exclusive provider." "Blizzard Busters?" I'd never heard of them. "Brenda, it's 4 in the morning. A professional service would have charged this neighborhood thousands of dollars for what I just did. I did it for the cost of my fuel." "That is irrelevant," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Rules are rules. You performed an authorized commercial activity on community property. As such, I am officially issuing you a fine of $500, she said it with such relish, as if she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. I felt a slow burn of anger start in my chest. This was beyond ridiculous. "You're fining me for plowing the snow? For helping our neighbors? For making sure Mrs. Gable isn't trapped in her house? Your motives are not the issue. Your violation is," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You will receive the official notice via email. Payment is due in 30 days, she then added, as a parting shot, "and I expect you to cease and desist from any further unauthorized plowing. That includes your own driveway, if you are using commercial equipment. It sets a bad precedent." Before I could even formulate a response to that mind-boggling statement, she turned on her heel and marched back down the driveway, her posture radiating self-satisfaction. I stood there in my doorway, the cold air washing over me, watching her go. The coffee in my hand had gone cold. A full-blown war had just been declared on my front porch, and the opening shot was fired over a pile of snow. I knew, with a sinking certainty, that this was only the beginning. That same day, an email went out to the entire neighborhood. It was from Brenda, of course. It praised the efficiency of the new official vendor, Blizzard Busters, who had yet to show up, and then dropped the bombshell. To cover the costs of this professional service, our annual HOA dues were being doubled, effective immediately. I treated the fine with the contempt it deserved. I ignored it. I printed the email, crumpled it into a ball, and tossed it into the fireplace. It was a gesture, of course, but it made me feel slightly better. My logic was simple. This was a temporary insanity, a power trip from a woman with too much time on her hands. Once people saw how ridiculous it was, they would come to their senses, Brenda would be reined in, and things would go back to normal. That was my first mistake. I underestimated the power of apathy and the tenacity of a true petty tyrant. A week later, a certified letter arrived. It was from the HOA, which was to say, it was from Brenda. Inside was a second notice for the initial $500 fine, plus an additional $500 fine for failure to remit payment in a timely manner. The total was now $1,000. The letter was filled with legal-sounding jargon, citing bylaws and clauses, and ended with a thinly veiled threat about further legal action. It was absurd, but the official letterhead and the legalese gave it a weight that an email couldn't. This was real. Meanwhile, Brenda's grand plan for professional snow removal was proving to be a disaster. Blizzard Busters Incorporated, when they finally decided to grace us with their presence, were a joke. They showed up 2 days after the storm in a beat-up pickup truck with a plow that looked like it had been salvaged from a junkyard. They did a single, sloppy pass down the middle of our lane, leaving a mountain of snow at the end of each driveway. They took out 3 mailboxes, including George's, and scraped a deep gouge into the asphalt near the entrance. Their work was shoddy, their attitude was surly, and their bill, as I would later discover, was astronomical. The grumbling in the neighborhood grew from a whisper to a low roar. People were furious about the double dues, the terrible service, and the damaged property. But no one was willing to confront Brenda directly. She had cultivated an atmosphere of fear. She would stand on her porch and watch people, taking notes on a clipboard. She sent out violation notices for the most trivial things: a basketball hoop left out overnight, a patch of brown grass, a political sign lingering 2 days after an election. People were afraid of being her next target, so they kept their heads down and paid their double dues. Mrs. Gable was the first real casualty. She was a sweet woman in her late 70s who had lived in Maple Creek since the very beginning. Her husband had passed away a few years prior, and she was living on a tight budget. The double dues were more than just an inconvenience for her, they were a genuine hardship. I saw her at her mailbox one afternoon, and she looked distressed. She showed me the letter she'd received. It was a final notice, written in an aggressive, accusatory tone, threatening a lien on her property if she didn't pay the new assessment immediately. "I don't know what to do, Frank," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've never been late on a payment in my life. But this is half of my grocery money for the month." Seeing her fear and worry solidified something in me. This wasn't just about a stupid fine over snow plowing anymore. This was about a bully preying on the most vulnerable members of our community. This was about the soul of the neighborhood we had built. I told her not to worry, that I would figure something out. I wasn't sure what that something was yet, but I knew I couldn't stand by and do nothing. That evening, I walked over to see George. He was one of the other original homeowners, a retired history professor with a sharp mind and a healthy disdain for authority. He was sitting on his porch, trying to reattach his mangled mailbox to its post. "That woman is a menace," he said without preamble as I approached. "In all my years, I've never seen anything like it. She's running this place like it's a prison camp." I told him about my fines, about the certified letter, and about Mrs. Gable. He just shook his head, his face grim. "It's wrong, Frank. It's just plain wrong. We built this place to be a community, not a fiefdom. What are you going to do?" "I think I need to talk to a lawyer," I said. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth. I was a man who solved problems with a wrench or a shovel, not with legal counsel. But Brenda had pushed this into a realm I didn't understand. She was weaponizing rules and regulations, and I was out of my depth. This lien threat is serious. I can't just ignore it anymore. The next day, I made an appointment with a man named Mr. Davies. He was a local lawyer, a quiet, methodical man whose office was filled with dusty law books and the smell of old paper. I laid out the whole story, the history of the HOA, my years of plowing the snow, Brenda's sudden takeover, the fines, the terrible new service, and the threat of a lien. I brought a thick folder containing every piece of paper I had, the original HOA incorporation documents from 20 years ago, the recent threatening letters, even a copy of Brenda's email announcing the double dues. Mr. Davies listened patiently, his fingers steepled under his chin. He read through every document, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow sigh. "Well, Frank," he said, "you've got yourself a classic case of what we in the legal profession call a runaway board. It's unfortunately common. One person gets a taste of power, and they lose all perspective." "So what can I do?" I asked. "Can she really put a lien on my house for this?" "Technically," he said, choosing his words carefully, "an HOA does have the power to levy fines and place liens for unpaid dues and assessments. The law gives them broad authority. Challenging them can be an uphill battle. It's expensive, time-consuming, and the courts often defer to the HOA's recorded bylaws." My heart sank. "So I just have to pay her?" "Not necessarily," Mr. Davies said, a faint glint in his eye. "You have something that most people in your situation don't. You have history." He tapped the thick stack of original documents I had brought. "The answers, if they exist, are likely in here. Her new rules are only valid if they don't contradict the foundational documents of the corporation. I need to go through this charter, article by article. It's your best shot." He agreed to take my case. As I left his office, I felt a small flicker of hope, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of dread. This was escalating far beyond what I ever could have imagined. I was now in a legal battle for my home. And Brenda was still out there, clipboard in hand, getting more powerful and more brazen by the day. The fight had begun, but I had no idea how I was going to win it. Armed with the knowledge that there might be a solution buried in the paperwork, I felt a shift inside me. The frustration and anger began to morph into a cold, determined resolve. Brenda wanted a war of paper and procedure? Fine. I would learn to fight on her turf. My first step was to do some digging of my own. I started with Blizzard Busters Incorporated. A quick search on the state's business registry website turned up some interesting information. The company was brand new, incorporated just 2 months prior. The registered agent and sole officer listed was a man named Dennis Fromm. The address was not a commercial property, but a residential home in the next county over. Fromm. The name was too much of a coincidence. I did a bit more searching on social media. It took me less than 10 minutes to find Brenda's beaming face in a family photo alongside a man she identified as my wonderful brother-in-law, Dennis. So, Blizzard Busters wasn't just an incompetent, overpriced contractor, it was her family. She had used her position as HOA president to award a lucrative, no-bid contract to her own relative. This wasn't just unethical, it was almost certainly illegal. It was self-dealing, a clear conflict of interest and a breach of her fiduciary duty to the community. I printed out the business registration and the family photo and added them to my growing evidence folder. My conversation with George had also sparked an idea. He and I weren't the only original homeowners left. There were 6 of us still living in Maple Creek. I spent the next few days visiting each of them. I showed them the letters, told them about Mrs. Gable, and explained the situation with Brenda's brother-in-law. Their reactions were a mixture of shock and fury. They remembered the barbecues, the handshakes, the shared labor that had built this place. This perversion of our simple agreement was a personal insult to them. They all had their original closing documents and copies of the initial HOA charter tucked away in filing cabinets. They were more than happy to help. While I was gathering allies and evidence, Brenda was escalating. She had the damaged mailboxes replaced, not with the original styles the homeowners had, but with the same ugly beige plastic box she had mandated earlier. She simply sent the homeowners a bill for the upgraded mailbox. Then she announced a new special assessment. The plowing from blizzard busters had allegedly damaged the asphalt, the same gouge I'd seen them make, and every homeowner was being assessed an additional $300 for the repair. The neighborhood was practically boiling over with resentment, but it was a quiet, simmering anger. People were still too afraid to challenge her openly. They felt trapped. My phone rang a few days later. It was Mr. Davies. "Frank, I think you need to come down to my office. I found something. I think I've found everything." There was an urgency in his voice that I hadn't heard before. I drove to his office immediately. He had my original charter document spread out across his large mahogany desk. He was holding one particular page, and he was smiling. "Brenda's mistake," he began, "is that she's an amateur. She read the bylaws, the day-to-day rules, and figured that was all that mattered. She probably downloaded a template from the internet to write her new ones. But she never bothered to read the most important document of all, the Articles of Incorporation. The Charter. This is the legal DNA of Maple Creek Estates, filed with the county and the state 20 years ago." He slid the page across the desk to me. He pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. The section was titled Article X, Founding Members. I leaned in and read the words that would change everything. Section 4, in consideration of their initial capital investment and material contributions toward the establishment of the community's core infrastructure, including but not limited to road paving and well installation, the 10 original property purchasers, herein designated as founding members, shall be exempt from any and all regular dues, special assessments, fees, or other financial levies imposed by the Homeowners Association, in perpetuity. I read it again, the word swimming before my eyes. In perpetuity. For life. What does this mean? I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It means, Frank," Mr. Davies said, leaning back in his chair with a deeply satisfied look on his face, "that you don't owe Brenda a dime. You never have. You never will. None of the fines she has levied against you are valid. The double dues don't apply to you. The special assessment doesn't apply to you. She has absolutely no legal basis to demand a single penny from you, and therefore, no basis to place a lien on your property." A wave of relief so profound it almost made my knees weak washed over me. It was like a physical weight being lifted off my shoulders. "And the other founders?" "Same goes for them," he confirmed. "All 6 of you living there are untouchable. This clause is ironclad. It was recorded as part of the original property deeds. To change it, she would need a 100% vote from all homeowners, including the unanimous consent of every single founding member. It's an impossible bar to clear." I sat there for a moment, letting the beautiful, legal reality of the situation sink in. Brenda, in her arrogant rush to seize power, had missed the one rule that mattered most. She had built her entire campaign of intimidation against me on a foundation of sand. "But that's not all," Mr. Davies continued, his smile widening. He picked up the printouts I had given him about blizzard busters. "This evidence of self-dealing is the nail in her coffin. We don't just have a defense anymore, Frank. We have an offense. A strong 1 inch. My defensive crouch, the feeling of being under siege, vanished. It was replaced by a surge of adrenaline, a clear sense of purpose. The game had changed. I wasn't just fighting to protect myself anymore. I was fighting to take back our neighborhood. "So what's our next move?" I asked, my voice steady and clear. Mr. Davies steepled his fingers again. "The annual HOA meeting is next month. Brenda will have to present her budget for a vote. She will try to railroad it through. That is where we make our stand. Not in a courtroom, but in front of the entire community. We will let her walk right into the trap she built for herself." The plan was simple, elegant, and utterly devastating. We would prepare a packet of information for every homeowner. The packet would contain a copy of Article X, Section 4 of the Charter. It would contain a list of the founding members still living in the community. It would contain the state business registration for Blizzard Busters Incorporated, showing Dennis From as the owner. And it would contain the social media photo of Brenda and her brother-in-law. We wouldn't editorialize. We would just present the facts and let them speak for themselves. For the next few weeks, I became a reluctant strategist. I met with the other founding members, explaining the situation and our plan. Their indignation turned to steely resolve. They were all in. We worked with Mr. Davies to refine the packets, ensuring everything was clear, concise, and legally sound. The atmosphere in the neighborhood was tense. Brenda seemed to sense a shift in the wind. Her memos became more frequent, her tone more strident. She posted new signs at the entrance detailing a complex and confusing new set of parking regulations. It was the desperate flailing of a tyrant who feels her grip beginning to slip. The night of the annual meeting arrived. It was usually held in the local library's community room, a drab, functional space with fluorescent lighting and stackable chairs. Normally, maybe 10 people would show up. Tonight, it was standing room only. The entire neighborhood was there. The air was thick with tension and resentment. Word had gotten out that something was going to happen. Brenda stood at a podium at the front of the room, flanked by the other 2 board members, a pair of meek men who had been completely cowed by her. She looked out at the packed room with a smug, self-satisfied expression, mistaking fear for respect. She clearly thought this massive turnout was a testament to her leadership. She opened the meeting with a long, self-congratulatory speech about all the improvements she had made to the community. She talked about standards, property values, and fiscal responsibility. When she finally got to the budget, she presented it as a foregone conclusion. It included the permanent doubling of the dues to keep Blizzard Busters on a yearly retainer. Now, she said, in a tone that suggested no discussion was necessary, we will move to a vote to approve the budget for the upcoming fiscal year. All in favor? Before anyone could even raise a hand, I stood up from my seat in the front row. Mr. Davies stood beside me, a calm, reassuring presence. Before we vote, I said, my voice ringing out in the silent room, I have a point of order. I believe several items in this budget, and indeed the entire financial conduct of the board, need to be discussed. Brenda's face tightened. A flicker of annoyance crossed her features. This is not the time for general complaints, Franklin. This is a vote on the budget. This is precisely the time, I countered, my voice firm. Because this budget is based on illegal fines and a fraudulent contract. A collective gasp went through the room. Brenda's face went from annoyed to furious. How dare you? Your personal grievances and delinquent fines are not the subject of this meeting. You are out of order. Am I? I asked calmly. I held up a single sheet of paper. I'd like to direct the community's attention to the founding charter of our association. Specifically, Article 10, Section for our founding members. I read the clause aloud, my voice clear and steady. I read the words exempt from any and all regular dues, special assessments, fees, or other financial levies, in perpetuity as I spoke. The other founding members, scattered throughout the room, stood up one by one. By the time I finished, 7 of us were standing, a silent testament to the history Brenda had tried to erase. The room was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Brenda's face had gone pale. She was sputtering, trying to form a response. That's an old document. It's outdated. The new bylaws I passed supersede that. This was Mr. Davies' cue. He stepped forward, his demeanor calm and professional. I'm afraid you are mistaken, Madam President, he said, his voice carrying an authority that could not be dismissed. An association's articles of incorporation, filed with the state, are the supreme governing document. They cannot be superseded by internal bylaws. Any bylaw that contradicts the charter is null and void. The fines and assessments levied against my client, Mr. Frank Hetler, and the other founding members here, are illegal. Any attempt to collect on them or place a lien constitutes legal harassment. Brenda stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Her entire platform of authority had been vaporized in a single paragraph. But I wasn't done. Now, let's talk about the budget, I said, turning back to the community. Let's talk about why our dues have been doubled. We've been told it's to pay for a professional service called Blizzard Busters. I held up the second document, the business registration. It might interest you all to know that this company is owned by a Mr. Dennis from. I paused for effect, letting the name hang in the air. Then I held up the last piece of paper, the family photo of a smiling Brenda with her arm around her brother-in-law. The murmuring in the room exploded into open outrage. People were on their feet, shouting questions, pointing fingers. The two board members beside Brenda looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. They were staring at her in horror, realizing the depth of the deception they had been a party to. "You gave our money to your family," someone yelled from the back. "This is fraud," shouted another. Brenda stood frozen at the podium, her face a ghastly shade of white. The mask of control had shattered, revealing the panicked, cornered person beneath. She tried to speak, to bang her gavel, but her voice was drowned out by the roar of a community that had finally found its voice. It was George who delivered the final blow. He stood up, his posture frail but his voice as strong as iron. "I, George Prentice, a founding member of this community, call for an immediate vote of no confidence in the President, Brenda from, and the entire current board." The response was a deafening chorus of "aye." It was unanimous. Brenda stared out at the sea of angry faces, her reign of terror over. She dropped the gavel, which clattered onto the podium, turned, and fled the room, pushing her way through the crowd as people recoiled from her. The tyrant had been deposed. The battle was over, and the neighborhood was ours again. The aftermath of that meeting was swift and decisive. Brenda's panicked retreat from the library was the last we saw of her as a figure of authority. The very next day, an ad hoc committee was formed, led by George, to manage the HOA's affairs. Mr. Davies guided them through the legal necessities of formally removing the old board and nullifying all of Brenda's recent rule changes and financial assessments. It was like a great, cleansing rain washing over Maple Creek. The first order of business was to fire Blizzard Busters. The contract was voided on the grounds of fraud and conflict of interest. Dennis from threatened to sue, but his threats evaporated the moment Mr. Davies sent him a letter detailing the potential for criminal charges and a civil suit for the recovery of all funds paid. We never heard from him again. But it didn't end there. Several homeowners, emboldened by the turn of events, felt that simple removal from office wasn't enough. They had been extorted. The money from the double dues and the special assessment had been paid directly to Brenda's family for a service that was both subpar and fraudulently contracted. A small group, led by a particularly incensed accountant who lived down the lane, took the evidence packet we had prepared and went to the district attorney's office. An official investigation was launched. The HOA's financial records were subpoenaed, and the investigators quickly unraveled Brenda's scheme. It was even worse than we had thought. She had been padding the invoices from her brother-in-law, taking a kickback for herself on top of funneling community funds to her family. What had started as a petty power trip had crossed the line into serious white-collar crime. A few months later, Brenda from was indicted on charges of wire fraud and embezzlement. Her mugshot appeared in the local paper. The trial was short. The evidence was overwhelming. She was found guilty on all counts. The judge, citing her egregious abuse of a position of trust, sentenced her to 18 months in a low-security federal prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered her to pay full restitution to the Maple Creek Estates HOA. The From house went up for sale shortly thereafter. They had to sell it to cover her legal fees and the restitution payments. The day the moving truck came, the neighborhood was quiet. There were no celebrations, no gloating. Just a profound sense of relief. We had excised a cancer from our community. With Brenda gone, the process of healing and rebuilding began. A new board was elected. George, despite his protests that he was too old, was unanimously voted in as the new president. His first act was to draft a new set of bylaws, which were essentially a return to our original, simple charter. The rules were few and focused only on the essentials, maintaining the road and the well. The dues were immediately returned to their original, reasonable level, and a motion was passed to refund every homeowner for the excess dues and special assessments they had paid under Brenda's rule. My own situation was resolved completely. The illegal fines were expunged from the record as if they had never existed. The HOA, under George's leadership, formally apologized to me and the other founding members for the harassment we had endured. They then offered my company, Frank's for Seasons, the official contract for landscaping and snow removal. It was a proper contract, competitively bid. I was the only bidder, as no one else wanted the job, and approved by a vote of the community. I accepted. It felt right. The atmosphere in Maple Creek changed almost overnight. The tension that had hung in the air for a year dissipated. People started talking to each other again. Neighbors who had been avoiding eye contact for fear of being reported for some minor infraction were now stopping to chat in the street. The ugly beige mailboxes were gradually replaced by a variety of personal styles. Garden gnomes and plastic flamingos began to reappear on lawns, like little flags of freedom. The potluck barbecue tradition was reinstated for the annual meeting, and it was the best attended one we'd ever had. We were a community again. Years passed. Maple Creek settled back into its comfortable, quiet rhythm. George eventually stepped down as president, passing the torch to a younger, but equally reasonable, homeowner. The HOA continued to operate as it was meant to, quietly, efficiently, and in the background. The story of what we started calling the Brenda regime became a local legend, a cautionary tale told to new homeowners about the dangers of letting a bully take charge. Our little neighborhood, once on the brink of being torn apart by rules and regulations, became known as a genuinely friendly and desirable place to live. Property values, the very thing Brenda claimed to be protecting, rose significantly. I saw her one last time, about 5 years after the trial. I was in a discount grocery store in the next town over, picking up some supplies for a job. As I stood in the checkout line, I glanced at the cashier, and my blood ran cold for a second. It was Brenda. She looked diminished. The fiery self-righteousness was gone from her eyes. She was older, tired, and a little heavier. She wore the drab uniform of the store, her name tag pinned crookedly. She was scanning items with a weary, practiced motion, her face a blank mask of resignation. Our eyes met for a brief moment. A flash of recognition, of shame, of something I couldn't quite name, passed across her face. She quickly looked down, focusing intently on ringing up a can of beans. She didn't say a word. Neither did I. I paid for my items, took my receipt, and walked out. I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction. I didn't feel anger. I mostly just felt a quiet, detached pity. Her quest for power and control over our 20 houses had cost her everything, her home, her reputation, her freedom. She was a ghost, haunting the aisles of a discount store, a living reminder of her own downfall. As I drove home, back to the peaceful, tree-lined lane of Maple Creek, I thought about the whole absurd affair. It was a lesson I never asked to learn, but one I'll never forget. It's about how easily a community can be poisoned by the ambition of one person who believes rules are more important than people. Rules are supposed to be a framework to help people live together, not a weapon to be wielded by those who crave control. They should serve the community, not the other way around. We learned that the only defense against a petty tyrant is solidarity. For a while, we were all isolated, grumbling in our own homes, too afraid to speak up. We let her divide us. It was only when we came together, when we realized that an injustice to one was a threat to all, that we found our strength. It took a common enemy, but we rediscovered our common bond. We remembered we weren't just a collection of property owners bound by covenants, we were neighbors. The snow is falling again tonight. It's a gentle snow this time, the kind that blankets the world in a quiet hush. In a few hours, I'll fire up the old F-350. The engine will roar to life, and I'll go out and plow the lane, just like I've done for almost 30 years now. I'll clear a path for my neighbors. I'll make sure Mrs. Gable's driveway is clear, and George's, and all the new families who have moved in since. I'm not a hero or a politician. I'm just Frank. A man with a plow, doing his part for the community he helped build, the community he helped save, and the community he calls home. And that's more than enough.